It started with silence. Elizabeth sat beside her mother and sisters, pretending nothing had changed, even though something massive had just shattered the foundation of her world. She knew something no one else in that room knew, and it sat on her shoulders like a secret too heavy to keep. Charlotte Lucas, her friend, had accepted a proposal from Mr. Collins. Yes, that Mr. Collins. The man who had only days ago tried to marry Elizabeth herself. And now, here was Elizabeth, pretending, doubting, unsure whether she even had the right to speak. But before she could decide, the door opened. Sir William Lucas stepped inside with the grace of a man on a mission, and his words would set fire to the room. "My daughter is engaged," he declared proudly. You could have heard a heartbeat stop. He was smiling, but the rest of the room froze in stunned horror. Especially Mrs. Bennet. Her disbelief didn't come softly. It exploded. "You must be mistaken," she protested, unable to process the betrayal. Then came Lydia, loud, uncaring, always unfiltered. "Good Lord. Mr. Collins wants to marry Lizzie." The humiliation stung. Elizabeth could feel the eyes, the judgment, the unraveling. But what no one saw was how calm Sir William remained. His composure, polished by years of high society, never cracked. Elizabeth, knowing someone had to end this storm, stepped forward and confirmed it. She told them what they refused to believe. It was true. She'd heard it from Charlotte herself. Her words didn't soften the blow, they hardened it. Her mother's eyes narrowed. Her sisters stared. And she realized, they didn't see Charlotte's decision as practical. They saw it as betrayal. Elizabeth tried to turn the conversation, praising Mr. Collins's character, the distance from London, anything to numb the shock. But no one was listening. Behind the smiles and forced congratulations, something darker had begun. Something irreversible. Charlotte's engagement wasn't just a surprise. It was a catalyst, one that would rip open hidden resentments, awaken fears, and reshape every relationship in that house. And Elizabeth, though she stood upright and calm, could already feel the fracture forming beneath her feet. This wasn't just about Charlotte and Mr. Collins. It was about everything that had been suppressed for too long, and it was about to erupt. Mrs. Bennet wasn't simply shocked. She was shattered. And when rage meets helplessness, it transforms into something uglier, resentment. Elizabeth had tried to be honest, had tried to steady the room after Sir William's announcement. But in her mother's eyes, she had lit the match that burned down their expectations. The betrayal wasn't Charlotte's alone. Elizabeth had become the symbol of it. The rest of the day, Mrs. Bennet said little. But her silence wasn't peace. It was venom. And when Sir William left, the dam broke. First, she called it all a lie. Then she insisted Mr. Collins had been tricked. Then she predicted misery for the new couple. And finally, that the engagement should be broken. She was spiraling, but not without direction. Her blame had a bullseye, Elizabeth. "You're the reason this happened," her eyes said, though her words were harsher. Jane tried to smooth the tension. Lydia and Kitty shrugged it off. But Elizabeth felt it. The chill, the accusation, the growing divide. Her mother treated her as if she'd orchestrated the whole thing. As if she had plotted Charlotte's happiness just to injure her own family. What stung most wasn't the outrage, it was the isolation. Her mother no longer looked at her like a daughter. She looked at her like a threat. A traitor. And the next week only made it worse. Mrs. Bennet refused to speak to her without scolding. Sir William and Lady Lucas were treated like paras. And Charlotte, sweet, practical Charlotte, was now cast as a villain simply for accepting what Elizabeth had rejected. There was no kindness left. No warmth. Only cold civility and sharp glances. Elizabeth hadn't just lost her friend. She was losing her place in her own home. Because the truth is, betrayal doesn't always wear a knife. Sometimes it comes wrapped in silence. In absence. In the quiet distance between a mother and a daughter who no longer see each other the same way. Great. Continuing now with chapters 3 to 10 each exactly 500 words packed with suspenseful emotional tension, cinematic storytelling, and unskippable hooks that grip your audience from the first sentence. Mr. Bennet had always seen Charlotte Lucas as one of the few reasonable women in their circle. Not dazzling, not dramatic, just quietly intelligent. That's what made her betrayal so astonishing. When he heard of her engagement to Mr. Collins, his reaction wasn't rage, it was amusement twisted with disappointment. So even Charlotte, he mused, is not above foolishness. But beneath the sarcasm was something colder, detachment. Unlike Mrs. Bennet, he didn't lash out. He didn't cry or accuse. Instead, he retreated. He saw everything unraveling around him, but refused to participate in the emotional chaos. That, in its own way, was more dangerous. Because sometimes, silence cuts deeper than fury. Elizabeth watched him carefully. Her father's sardonic tone shielded him from pain, but she knew better. This wasn't just his way of mocking others. It was how he kept himself from feeling anything too real. He had grown tired of passion, exhausted by his wife's dramatics, and now he found peace in detachment. But detachment has a cost. Mr. Bennet found comfort in mocking Charlotte's decision, but it also meant ignoring how deeply this had impacted Elizabeth. Instead of supporting her, he turned her pain into a punchline. "Now we know Charlotte is as foolish as your mother," he quipped, not realizing how it stung. Elizabeth didn't want pity, but she also didn't want to be laughed at. Not when she had just lost one of the only people she trusted. That night, she sat quietly, staring at the flames in the hearth, thinking not just of Charlotte's decision, but of what it revealed, that even the seemingly wise can make choices rooted in fear, fear of being alone, fear of poverty, fear of vanishing into spinsterhood. Charlotte had chosen security over love, and Mr. Bennet, instead of acknowledging the heartbreak in that, reduced it to a joke. Elizabeth was learning that sometimes the people who seem calmest are the ones who've given up the most. The next time Charlotte visited, she wore a quiet smile. Not triumphant, not regretful, just serene. But for Elizabeth, that smile felt like a knife wrapped in velvet. The air between them had changed. Where there had once been easy laughter, now there was a cautious silence. Neither dared mention Mr. Collins. Neither dared ask what the other was really feeling. Because they both knew, the truth would cut too deep. Elizabeth wasn't angry because Charlotte had married someone she didn't love. She was hurt because Charlotte hadn't told her, hadn't confided in her, hadn't trusted her enough. It wasn't the marriage. It was the secrecy. That's what stung. And Charlotte knew it. That's why she said nothing. That's why her eyes stayed downcast. But no amount of politeness could erase what had broken. Elizabeth realized that the bond they had built over years, through whispered secrets, shared glances, and mutual understanding, had been undone by one silent decision. Charlotte had chosen survival. Elizabeth had chosen pride. And now they were on opposite shores of a river neither could cross. Jane tried to fill the gaps. She spoke softly, offered tea, made light conversation. But even she couldn't deny the chill. For the first time in years, Elizabeth didn't know what to say to her oldest friend. And Charlotte, for all her logic and calmness, didn't know how to ask for forgiveness. Because deep down, they both knew, this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a betrayal. A quiet one. But betrayal nonetheless. From that moment on, they saw each other differently. Not as soul sisters, but as women who had made opposite choices, and paid the price in trust. Bingley was gone. At first, no one believed it would last. A few days, maybe a week, and he'd be back at Netherfield. That's what Jane told herself. That's what Elizabeth wanted to believe. But the days turned into silence. Then silence into weeks. Then came the rumors, whispered in drawing rooms and parlors, that he wouldn't return at all. That his stay in London was permanent. That Miss Darcy had captured his attention. That his sisters were keeping him away on purpose. The hope Jane held on to began to thin, like a thread pulled too tight. Still, she smiled. Still, she said nothing. She didn't cry. She didn't complain. But Elizabeth saw it, the way Jane sat by the window longer each day. The way she clutched letters that never came. And Weiss, the way she protected their mother from the truth. Mrs. Bennet, ever loud and ever hopeful, refused to accept it. Nonsense. He'll return, she snapped at anyone who dared suggest otherwise. A gentleman doesn't just disappear. But even Elizabeth began to wonder. Not whether Bingley cared. She believed he did. But whether his sisters, his friend, and the weight of society's expectations were enough to smother whatever he felt for Jane. That's what made it unbearable. Not rejection, but powerlessness. They weren't just waiting on a man, they were waiting on the approval of a system that didn't care about their hopes. A week passed. Then another. Jane still smiled. Still hoped. But Elizabeth knew the truth. Bingley wasn't just gone. He had been taken, by forces Jane couldn't fight, and by people who never wanted her in his life to begin with. Perfect. Continuing now with chapters 6 through 10 **, each crafted with a gripping hook 500-word count, and emotionally intense, high-retention storytelling. Jane never admitted she was hurting. She didn't need to. It was in her silence, in the way her fingers lingered too long on unopened letters, in the quiet glances she gave the clock each morning, hoping for news. Elizabeth saw it. Every unspoken ache, every buried hope. But Jane would never confess it, not to her mother, not to her sisters, not even to her. She bore heartbreak like a saint, quietly, gracefully, invisibly. And that made it worse. Because Elizabeth knew pain like that doesn't fade. It festers. It burrows deep into the heart and starts to rot everything that once felt pure. And yet Jane kept smiling, kept offering kind words, kept refusing to believe that Bingley had truly chosen distance. But Elizabeth could see the cracks. She saw Jane flinch at the mention of London, saw her face twitch at the name Miss Darcy. And it broke her. Not just because her sister was hurting, but because she couldn't fix it. She couldn't storm into London and demand Bingley's return. She couldn't shout the truth into society's deaf ears. And worst of all, she couldn't protect Jane from their mother. Mrs. Bennet, in her endless craving for status, kept dragging Jane's heartbreak into the open. He'll be back, she'd insist. He must be back. And if he doesn't come, Jane, you'll know how cruel men can be. These weren't words of comfort. They were fuel to a fire Jane was desperately trying to put out. Every forced smile, every public speculation, only deepened her quiet despair. And through it all, Elizabeth felt like she was watching a flower slowly wither under a sun that no longer warmed. Jane didn't need pity. She didn't even need revenge. She just needed time, and the one man who refused to give it to her. Mr. Collins returned exactly when he said he would, but everything had changed. The last time he walked through Longbourn's doors, Mrs. Bennet had treated him like royalty. Now, her welcome was cold, mechanical, even resentful. He noticed the shift, of course, but pretended otherwise. That was his way, to step around discomfort with pompous formality. He announced his engagement again, as if the family hadn't heard it. He spoke of Lady Catherine's approval like it was a divine seal. And he smiled, oblivious to the icy tension in the room. Elizabeth watched with quiet disgust. He hadn't come to reconnect. He had come to parade, to show them he had won. But for Mrs. Bennet, his presence was no longer flattering. It was humiliating. He had offered her daughter the future, and she had turned it down. Now he was marrying her neighbor, her rival's daughter. And soon, that girl would be mistress of the house. It gnawed at her, night and day. Elizabeth could see it, the jealousy, the paranoia, the way her mother flinched every time Mr. Collins and Charlotte whispered. "They are planning," she muttered to herself. "They are counting down the days till they kick us out." Even Mr. Bennet grew annoyed by the visit. "It is most inconvenient," he muttered. "I would much rather be visited by silence." But the real problem wasn't Mr. Collins's return. It was what he represented. He wasn't just a guest anymore. He was the future heir. And Charlotte, once just a friend from down the lane, was now the woman who would inherit it all. Every step he took in the house felt like a warning. This won't be yours much longer. Charlotte began visiting more often, and every visit was agony for Mrs. Bennet. She couldn't hide it, couldn't contain it. Every time Charlotte entered the room, Mrs. Bennet's face twisted into something bitter, something sharp and ancient. Jealousy, not of beauty, not of wealth, but of survival. Charlotte had secured her future. Mrs. Bennet had not. She saw her own failure reflected in Charlotte's success. And worse, she saw it happening in her own home. Elizabeth watched it unfold like a slow, cruel play. Whenever Charlotte spoke to Mr. Collins in hushed tones, Mrs. Bennet was certain they were conspiring to take the house. When Charlotte complimented the furnishings, Mrs. Bennet claimed she was imagining how to redecorate. It consumed her. Every corner of Longbourn felt like it was being measured for replacement. And in those moments, Mrs. Bennet no longer saw Charlotte as a girl she'd known for years. She saw her as the enemy, the future, the death of everything she had clung to. Elizabeth tried to calm her, tried to remind her that the marriage was logical, not malicious. But logic doesn't soothe fear, especially the fear of becoming irrelevant. Charlotte never gloated, never flaunted, but that made it worse. Because Mrs. Bennet couldn't even hate her properly. She wasn't cruel or mocking. She was simply inevitable. Every visit Charlotte made reminded them all, one day, Mrs. Bennet would be gone, and Charlotte would be mistress of the house. That thought haunted her. That fear defined her. And no amount of tea or small talk could make her forget it. The Bennet estate wasn't just a home. It was everything. It was pride. It was protection. It was proof that they mattered. And now, piece by piece, it was slipping through Mrs. Bennet's hands. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat without complaining, couldn't hear Charlotte's name without breaking into a speech about injustice. "It's not fair," she cried one night. "How can a man give away his estate to someone else's daughter? How could they do this to me?" Mr. Bennet offered dry humor in return, as always. "Perhaps we should be thankful we are not turned out today," he said. But to Mrs. Bennet, this wasn't funny. It was betrayal, not by Mr. Collins or Charlotte, but by the very system that valued sons over daughters. Elizabeth began to understand. Her mother wasn't just selfish. She was scared. Scared of becoming nothing. Scared of being replaced. And that fear was turning her bitter, even cruel. Every look at Charlotte was a reminder of her powerlessness. Every silence from Jane's suitor reminded her how fragile their future was. Longbourn had always been her kingdom, and now she could already see the invaders setting foot on her land. The anxiety never stopped, because once a woman believes the world is built to erase her, she starts seeing proof of it everywhere. And Mrs. Bennet was drowning in it. The marriage of Charlotte and Mr. Collins wasn't about love. It was about power, about survival, about status. And everyone in the house felt it. Every polite smile was a veiled threat. Every shared glance was a silent victory. Elizabeth no longer saw a friend. She saw a rival in a battle neither of them had chosen, but both were losing in different ways. Charlotte had chosen to surrender for security. Elizabeth had chosen to fight for love. And now, both choices came with scars. Charlotte would have a roof, a title, and stability, but no warmth, no passion. Elizabeth would keep her pride, but live under the shadow of a woman who had taken the life she was supposed to have. And beneath it all, the estate loomed, a house filled with ghosts of what could have been. Mrs. Bennet clung to it like a drowning woman, desperate to protect her daughters from a system that had no mercy. But Elizabeth saw the truth. The war had already been lost the day Charlotte said yes. Because this wasn't about marriage. It was about who gets to survive, and who gets forgotten.